Hello, everybody. Welcome to another segment of the Women in Publishing Summit. This is going to be a workshop, and I'm super excited about this particular workshop. I am Alexa Bigwarf, host of this summit, and today I'm bringing you Kris Kennedy. Kris Kennedy is a USA Today bestselling author and founder of the Romance Writing Lab and the Romance Writers Summit, which went off with a great success for the first time this year, and I imagine it's just going to get better and better each year. She teaches writing craft and practices it to writing historical and contemporary romance. Historical being my favorite topic. So I'm really excited to bring you on board. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
First, I'd really like to know how you got started, and if you have, do you write like all over the place in romance, or do you have a specific genre or subgenre that you focus on?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so how I got started was, as most writers, as a reader. But for a long time, I did not read romance. In fact, I actively avoided it. At one point in my life, I was working my way through my local library, just, from A to Z, in the fiction section, just reading, pulling out any book that was even remotely interesting. And I bypassed every romance. And honestly, I think that I thought it said something about me. And I didn't want that thing to be true, whatever it was. I never, really dialed into it. But one day I came across this historical romance that was set in Ireland. And I was like, well, all right. And the day I finished reading it, that night I was up till 3 a.m. writing.
Wow.
Writing something horrible, mind you. It was awful.
First draft, that first book.
Yeah.
I think deep inside we all want to be romance writers.
It's a big genre, and I really think, for me, romance genre gets dissed a lot and looked down on for, I'm sure, a variety of reasons. But I always think of what Nancy Pearl said, NPR librarian.
Yeah.
She said genre fiction gets judged by the worst of its examples, and literary fiction gets judged by the best.
That's so true.
And yeah, I think that is really true. And it's doubly true for romance. I don't know if it's because it's mostly women writing it, or that the kind of vulnerability of love is scary. It's, less scary to go shoot them up kind of thing. But what romance for me is, we're giving people hope. Hope of, a happily ever after, but that is usually about some kind of transformation in the person. And I think it's powerful.
I think, romance has to also fight against this old stereotypical, like when I think of romance books, I remember my mom's bookshelf of cover after cover of a woman with, looked like she was on a pirate ship with her hair thrown back and her dress like halfway open and, some really hot
thing.
Yes, exactly. A hot hunky guy, like, about to walk the plank for her or whatever. And just cover after cover of this same woman and same man in different poses. So, I think for those of us in that who remember that, like, that's kind of what pops to mind, but there can be so much more depth to it. And when you think about,
exactly,
historical fiction in particular, like when I think about what really nabs me in a good book, what grabs me, is nab even a word?
Yeah, it works.
What grabs me in a good book is that connection between people, and a budding romance is always something like you're always rooting for that couple to get together.
Yes, exactly. In fact, that's one of the things I talk about in the workshop is that part of building the promise of them. And you have to do that. And, what are some of the ways that we do? But that's what you're talking about, that rooting for them and hoping for them. That's essential. We have to do that. And it keeps us turning pages.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. I was wondering this because I've, thanks to the evolution of technology, whether it's your Kindle or your Netflix or whatever, like we have this ability to binge stuff, right. TV shows, books, whatever. So that's what I'll do until I get really bored of something. Like I'll watch, 40 episodes in a row, not in one sitting generally. Who has time for that? But like, that's what I'll be, if I decide I'm going to watch something, you know, I'll turn to that, and you get to the point where you're like, oh my gosh, is this ever going to stop? This like, oh, we almost got together, then we didn't, then something happened, then, you know, the ex-wife that everyone thought was dead comes back from the grave, and it's like, oh. Yeah. But when you watch it in like normal time or put it in one book, like you have to have that, like, oh, we thought everything was going to be perfect, and then boom.
Yes.
Somebody's grandma died and they had to, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, those turning points. But you're right. I think you nailed something really important, that the way I talk about it is you're constantly building fear in the reader that the thing won't happen, but the hope that it will, and the desire for it too. And really, that is the same as in every other genre. So like in, you know, thrillers, there's the fear that the bad guy, you know, the terrorists are going to win, and the hope that the good guy will win. Or in a mystery, you know, the hope of the fear that the murderer will never be found, and the hope that they will. And so it's the same thing in all genres.
Absolutely. Well, Kris has actually prepared a workshop for us, which is really awesome, because she's going to dig deep into the whole idea for us. So for all of you, either existing fiction writers or wannabe fiction writers, why don't you tell us a little bit about what is in store in the workshop portion of this presentation?
Okay. What I did was I pulled out 4 keys to building a powerful romance. It's, you know, I didn't dive into basic story structure, but that's super important. And I didn't dive into a lot of the other pieces of writing a great book, but just the 4 keys to building a great romance. Because when I do editing or story coaching for people, when they're often first starting in romance, there's certain things that aren't happening to make it really compelling. So what I did in the workshop was I just broke out 4 keys with really specific, I explained like why you want to do this, and then really specific ways of how you can do this.
That's wonderful. Can you just kind of explain briefly what the difference is in different types of romance?
Okay. Yeah.
Because like you just, I mean, you don't just sit down and write a romance, you write in a specific kind of pattern, right?
Yes. There are so many. Any genre of fiction has a romantic subgenre as well. So romance is there, and there are, you know, kind of straight contemporary romances that sometimes don't have really much of a plot. It's mostly about them being together and what keeps them apart. But then there's, you know, anything that you're interested in that lights the muse. There's a place for it. There's romantic thrillers. There's romantic suspense. There's YA, you know, young adult. There's, you know, futuristic and paranormal and sci-fi and mystery. I mean, there's everything. There's romantic, everything. And there are readers in every one of those little subgenres, lots of them.
Now, when I hear people talking about the difference between like sweet, cozy, and something like that, can you give us, are there like a number of like key, like main romance categories? Because I one thing I do know that's been made very clear to me is you do not put steamy stuff in a sweet romance.
Don't do that. Not only because you'll piss off the sweet readers, but you'll miss your real readers. You know, the ones who want that. And there's no way in, say, for instance, Amazon, to really designate the sensual heat level. But so you do that in how you, you know, your book copy and your cover, the look of it, you know, and the way you describe the book copy, the description, you'll sort of hit those things. But yeah, there's, you know, romances that have no sex, no sexual energy. It's very much, just, you know, kind of more the spiritual or the personality romance. And then there's sweet, which is, you know, just they may or may not kiss, and then you just kind of bump it up in heat level to, you know, erotic romance, which is different from erotic. In an erotic romance, the sex, which is very, explicit and central, that the sex is the turning point for the romance, and in the end they get together, because that is the heart of romance. There is a happily ever after or a happily for now. The story is optimistically uplifting.
That's good to know. So if you write a book that one of the main characters in the love situation dies, or there is no happily ever after, then that's
Right.
not a romance.
Correct. You will, yeah. And again, you'll really anger romance readers, but then you'll miss your real target audience,
Yeah.
people who they're reading, for the larger plot, and they don't mind that,
Right.
that they don't get together in the end.
Well, I think the big takeaway from this discussion is that if you're brand new to romance, you have to spend a little bit of time figuring out what the norms of your genre are, and those subgenres. And then you also really have to figure out who you're writing for.
Mm-hmm.
Because I tell you what, I have never written I've never published a fiction book, period. I've never written a romance, but I have heard from some romance writers that the romance readers are like, they know what they want, they know what they're supposed to expect, and if you put the wrong kind of book in the wrong genre, you
Yes.
will get hammered.
Yes, you will, and you won't sell, and they will be angry. Yeah, because they're
we don't want angry
voracious.
readers.
No. And they read, 5, 6, 7 books a week. These are people who you want to give them what they want. Right. Just like, if you're shopping at a store and you're like, oh, here's the shirt department and there's a bunch of shoes in there. You're like, what?
What is this?
Yes.
That is so true. Well, I'm really looking forward to all the tips and resources that you provide in this workshop. I think it's going to be very useful for anyone who's trying to become. Now, do you speak pretty much globally to romance, or do you go into any particular subgenre?
No, I'm in it talking about the 4 key components to build that satisfying romance in whatever genre, whatever romantic genre. So, big plot or little plot, these are the things for the romance that still need to happen.
Awesome. That is so great. So this will be a wonderful tool for anybody, regardless of genre, who wants to include a piece of romance in their book.
Yes.
Yay. Well, thank you so much, Kris. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Hi, everyone. I am really happy to be here with you today as part of Alexa's Women in Publishing Summit. I am Kris Kennedy. I'm a romance author, founder of Romance Writing Lab, and the host of Romance Writers Summit. And I'm here today to talk to you about romance. We're going to talk about 4 keys to crafting powerful romances that readers will love. So let me pull up the slides because they are more interesting to look at than me. Like I said, we're going to talk about 4 keys to crafting a romance that readers are going to love. You might be asking, why would I even want to write a romance? And my answer is, why not? It's the hottest it's the hottest genre in fiction. There are limitless subgenres. Anything you want to write, there will be readers waiting for it, from thrillers to fantasy to young adult to dystopia to every historical era you can think of, as far back as you want to go to the 1970s. There is something there for everyone, and they are voracious. They read a ton, multiple books a week. But adding a love interest isn't enough. Romance is its own fiction ecosystem. It has genre conventions and story requirements that readers are looking for, and you need to nail them to get yourself readers and get yourself found. Don't be fooled. Romance isn't easy. I know it can get a bad rap in a lot of worlds, but romance writers have to juggle a lot. In fiction, there's generally one protagonist. There could be several, but generally one is primary, and the others are supporting members. Everything from Dodgeball to Mission Impossible. It's generally one character is the main one, and you're juggling their arc and the plot, whatever the plot is, however big or small. And the person generally has to go on some kind of journey to achieve a goal, and go through some kind of character transformation. So that's what we're juggling in most fiction. In romance, you're juggling a lot more. There's the plot. There's multiple character arcs. There's one for every romantic lead. So, two or more. And that means each character has to go on some kind of transformational journey to change. They have to learn something or realize something, to do things different and realize whatever they need to realize to win at the end. And in romance, you also have the romantic arc. And that one is primary. That is, the romance goes through the same kind of change and tension, excuse me, as the other arcs, the plot, and each individual character. So I want to talk for a second about what an arc is, because I keep mentioning it. An arc is just change and movement. It's motion. If you picture an actual line arc, the line goes up and up and up and up and up, and then it drops off. Well, that up and up and up and up and up is rising tension. And it happens along a connected thread in each of those three areas. So the plot is one event that happens is connected to the next event that's connected to the next event. The individual journey, whatever they experience, think, or do in one scene is connected to what they experience, think, or do in another. And it keeps getting more difficult and more challenging. And the same thing for the romance. So that is what an arc is. And I just wanted to kind of pull that out and just talk about it for a second. So in a romance, those three threads are at work. There's the character arcs, the growth and transformation of each of the leads. Two or more. There's the escalating stakes and situations of the plot itself. And there's the romance. These all need to be intertwined, but none can take primacy over the romance because, well, romance. So I'm not going to be able to cover all the different elements and techniques for building and weaving together plot and character and romance. I do that in other courses, but what we are going to cover are 4 vital components that you can do, simple, concrete things that you can do to build a gorgeous and compelling romance. And we're not only going to cover what you need to do, but we're going to go over some ways for how to do it. So all you non-romance writers, you're going to get a lot out of this too. So I would love to have you stay tuned. All right. So the first key is about conflict. You want to show the chasm between the romantic leads. And like I said, by chasm, I mean conflict. The heart of drama is conflict. And in romance, that's the romantic conflict. Other conflicts matter, the plot, external story world, the character's goals, their internal journey. But the outcome of all those is in the service of the romance. That romance conflict is what is going to show the gap between the romantic leads. I like to think about it as the impassable chasm. They're each standing on a mountaintop, a million miles apart. And it's the reason they'll never get together. And you need this. You need a reason they can't just fall in love on page 25. And I will say that writers can be somewhat timid with our conflict. We don't really want to put the screws to our characters. We don't necessarily make them suffer as much as we could have. We don't dig deep enough and really make their lives hell. But seriously, that's your job. You're the author. You are the deliverer of suffering. And you need to make them suffer. And one of the ways you do that in a romance is you put that impassable chasm between them, the reason they'll never get together. This is how you build fear in the reader. And when you hear fear, you should think tension. And tension is essential for drama. Oh my gosh, the reader's thinking, they're on different mountaintops. How are they ever going to get together? That's what you want. And the bigger that chasm is, the more conflict there is, keeping them apart, the more that we fear they will never cross it, and the more we cheer when they do. This is just like what happens in non-romance stories. The more fearsome the bad guy is, the more we fear that they're going to fail, and the more satisfying their win is at the end. So it's the same concept of tension, only you're putting it between the characters. The enemy really is the thing between the characters. So how do you build conflict? How do you build these chasms? Let's talk about some of the strategies. There are external chasms and internal chasms, and we're going to talk about both. Let's start with the external. External chasms are the external conflicts, and the easiest and most common and one of the best ways to get a good external chasm is to set the characters' story goals at odds. It's in almost every story. They have goals that they both can't achieve. They're lawyers on opposing sides, or there's the CEO of a company that wants to buy a piece of land that the cupcake bakery romantic lead's land is on, and they don't want to sell because it's been in the family for 100 years. They both can't get what they want. And this fuels the romantic conflict, and that is a really good thing to do. So make what they want be directly related to the plot, and make it be a one person wins situation. Even if you don't have much of a plot, if your story is kind of smaller in scope or shorter, you probably still are going to have some kind of external plot, however thin it may be, if only to force the leads together if they're really into each other, if they're not really into each other, or to keep them apart if they are. So really in a romance, plot is the thing that's pushing them together or pulling them apart. It's making them do the opposite of what their heart says to do at any point in the story until the end, when those things get aligned. So again, it's the easiest and most common technique, and it's really effective. Another thing that you can do, and it's tied directly to goals, you're going to want to develop strong motivation for that goal. That's the reason they're pursuing their goal. It's the stakes. It's the consequences of positive or negative if they succeed and if they fail. External consequences, motivation, stakes. External ones are things related to their personal life. It could be money, prestige, home, lifestyle, that sort of thing, reputation. And there are also external stakes in other character relationships, others who will be affected by this. It can be family or coworkers or friends. It can be the entire civilized world. But these are the things that will happen in the external world if they succeed or fail. Internal motivations they live inside the character. They are beyond or beneath the external. I like to think of internal motivations or stakes as the meaning of the thing. Well, if they succeed, if they get their goal, what will it mean to them? And if they fail, what will it say about them? And this is almost always backstory driven. So dig into their backstory to find some reasons that they're pursuing the goal and why it matters so much. This motivation is really important, both the internal and also the external. Why? Because it's what keeps them on their mountaintop when they'd rather come down and get with the other lead. And it keeps them pursuing their story goal. And this is what answers that core romantic question of why not just fall in love on page 25? And you need this. Okay. Another way that you can set your characters at odds is to set their personalities or their roles in the story at odds. And this is something that happens all the time. A lot of times you're tapping into tropes. These are, the powerful CEO and the hippie. That kind of thing. You can set their personality, something about each of them that just maybe annoys or bothers them. Set those things at odds. Set their worldviews at odds. They have different beliefs or things that they value. And this puts them at loggerheads. It puts them in conflict. The daughter of my enemy kind of thing. But you will find a lot of this in the romance tropes. Tropes are powerful Tropes are like a shorthand for conflict. It's a shorthand for why the leads can't get together, and it tells the reader what kind of story they're going to get. Opposites attract. So this is a fun way to put some kind of chasm and conflict between your characters. The core similarities are the glue that are going to pull them together, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But those opposites are important sparks that can, in their annoyance or irritation or separateness, can really pull them together. And the last external chasm that I want to talk about is making the romance forbidden. This is some kind of external force that's making it impossible for them to get together. It can be secondary characters. They could even be sympathetic secondary characters, family or friends, but they're not in support of the romance for some reason. Can be a family history. Like I said before, their roles can be at odds, making the romance forbidden, and two lawyers on opposing sides, that kind of thing. Or social mores or tradition, something that is making the romance absolutely not okay. Basically, there will be repercussions in the world if outside the romance, and the person doesn't want to deal with those yet. All right, so I just want to talk a second about the power of building these chasms in the external world for the middle of your story, because a lot of times stories sag in the middle, and we call them sagging middles. And this is when your story just kind of falls apart. You start to get bored. The conflicts wrapped up or resolved sooner than you thought. The characters get together, start liking each other, and then you just kind of start piling on new conflicts. You're stuck. You don't know what to do, so you just start adding new things. Building up conflict in some of the ways that we talk about will help prevent this, because if you don't do it, your story will fall apart in the middle. Low conflict or easily solved external conflicts will make your story fall apart in the middle. Or insufficient motivation to keep them chained to their goal. In other words, they don't really have enough reason to resist falling in love on page 25. Page 25 is random. What I mean is early in the story. And inadequate chasms also lead to recycled conflict. This is something that happens a lot in stories. The characters are having the same argument or rehashing the same issues on page 250 as they were on page 20. Readers don't like that. You won't like it. It gets boring to write about. So when your story sags in the middle, you're almost always going to need to build higher stakes to keep them focused on their story goal. Versus giving in to their growing attachment to the other person. And doing just those four things that we talked about will do a lot for beefing your story up, giving it muscles in the middle. All right, so we've talked about external chasms. Let's talk about some of the internal chasms, and in ways this will piggyback on the motivation that we talked about. So one way that you can build something inside the character that keeps them from the romance is to give them something to hide, some kind of secret, something that's hidden from the world and derived from their backstory. But it's something that fuels that grim determination to achieve their goal, and it's the reason they can't choose the romance. It's the kinds of things that people hide are desires that are somehow forbidden, or past shame or rejection. That can often be a powerful secret. Them trying to right some past wrong or error or make reparations somehow by achieving their current story goal. Needing to prove something to someone, even if the person they need to prove it to isn't around anymore. Some kind of inner flaw that they don't want to face. And of course, fears. Fears are a great secret, something that they can be hiding. So when you do this, when you give them something to hide, maybe even kind of hidden from the self or pushed away into the darkness so they don't have to face it, what you're going to find is this is a great thing to have them grapple with and face in that dark night of the soul late in the story. The thing they finally have to realize and acknowledge and admit and face is what will give them the strength to do whatever they need to do at the end and claim their romance. Secrets are great for that. You want to set their core beliefs and values apart, make them opposed in some fundamental way. And I talked about this a little with setting their personalities or worldviews at odds. But what I'm talking about here is setting it at or near the main story problem. So we're talking about the CEO who is trying to take over the land that the cupcake bakery is sitting on because they value, you know, power and money. They have a belief that he who has the most toys wins. And the other lead believes family and tradition is what's most important in the world, and that's where you get your real power, for instance. That will set them at odds, not only in their story goal, but in every interaction they have. You'll be able to use that kind of thing. So if you set their opposing goals or values or beliefs near the main story problem, this will keep them more committed to their goal and more separate from each other. And you can even tie it to their backstory. Basically, if they keep believing or valuing this thing, they'll get the goal, but they'll lose the romance. And these kinds of beliefs and values are things like, you can't trust anyone. If someone sees the real me, they'll abandon me. Loving means being vulnerable, and being vulnerable means death. He who has the most toys wins. Those kinds of things are the fundamental beliefs that you can set at odds. And if you tie it to the main story problem, you'll get a lot of power. Because these external plot problems and character goals are really nothing but a way to show that inner chasm, the difference between the characters. All right, so these are some of the great ways that you can build conflict between your leads. There's the external and the internal, and I will make sure you guys have these review slides that you can look at later. All right, so conflict, though, thankfully, is not enough for a romance, because you not only need to keep them apart, you need to bring them together. And how are you going to do that? Well, you're going to show the promise of them. This is the hope. Hope is essential. Conflict is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Hope is the promise of the romance. It's the reason they belong together. It's the reason they have to be together. It'll break the reader's hearts if they don't get together. Basically, you need to show why your romantic leads belong together, how they're better together. The reader will see it. They won't for a while because our characters are blind. Now, some romances are great at building all the conflict that we've talked about, all the reasons they can't be together. But if that's all your story does, we're never really going to root for them to be together. And sometimes passion can be used as a stand-in for true connection, you know, that desire piece. So we're going to talk about some other ways to build a connection between the characters. And I'll talk about this more in a moment, but you're constantly calibrating the fear and the hope, the chasm and the promise, the conflict and the love. You're constantly calibrating those. You're building your reader's fear that the romance is doomed, and their hope and desire that it will win out in the end. All right, so how do you build hope? How do you build the promise of the character? Well, show affinity. Show some way that they're alike. Just like I was saying, build in some personality trait or worldview that's unalike, that puts them in conflict. Build some way that they are alike. It can be anything. It can be all things. Personality, sense of humor, the kinds of things they find irritating, how they approach problems. Are they both uptight or laid back? What they like or don't like, their values, what they think is important, their sense of humor. These kinds of things, don't underestimate the power of them having something that is the same. They find an affinity in that other person, and it's way more powerful if they didn't expect it, if it didn't fit with the other person's public persona. So they're kind of seeing a hidden side of that person, or at least something that's been the other person has kept hidden from them. Making it an unexpected discovery is really powerful. So, you know, the corporate CEO and the hippie chick are intensely at odds, but they both love the same music and laugh at the same jokes. And they both watch Star Trek marathons on New Year's Eve instead of going out. Don't underestimate this. It's really, really powerful. All right. The next thing you want to do, and this is so much fun and it's really easy to do, especially because it's tied to the plot, have them successfully solve a problem together. This is one of the best ways to build hope because you're building them as a team. You show their potential for an HEA. People who can't solve problems together, who can't respect each other, who can't like set their own stuff aside and acknowledge when others have value or, you know, have something to add. People who can't adapt and change are not going to last in a relationship, and readers know this. So this is one of the things, not doing this is one of the things that can make readers not believe in their HEA, happily ever after, or they're happily for now. So somewhere in the first 25, 50% of your story, throw a problem at them and let them solve it by relying on each other's strengths or talents. A lot of times it's something they don't do well themselves. So that anal character who just annoys the heck out of the other person actually knows exactly how to solve this problem because of that character trait. And repeat this a few times. It doesn't have to be a big thing. They can be figuring out what to do about a flat tire. You don't need this to be huge, but you need it to be present because it shows that they have a chance and they belong together, that they work well together. Another thing that is a strategy for building the promise is one that I think most people associate with the romance genre, and that is desire, sex, sexual attraction. It is one of the most common and really powerful ways that authors build the promise of the romance, and it works great. But you can do more with desire and sex to show a connection between your leads than simply desire and sex. You can tap into their character arcs with it because you are never more vulnerable than when you're naked, and you're never more vulnerable than when your desire for anything has been laid bare. So the act of desiring is in and of itself a vulnerability, and it's perfectly made to tie into their romance or their personality arc. So I want to just talk a little bit about how you can tie it into their arc. But before I do that, I do want to mention one of the best ways to make sex more than just sex is to make it have consequences in the story. So inside the person, they think or feel something different than they did before the sex. It doesn't have to be sex, whatever desire related behavior happens in your romance. It can also and should obviously have consequences in the romance itself. They are different together afterwards than they were before. It could be positive or negative. And there's also consequences in the external world. In the plot or in secondary relationships, things typically get more difficult after a sex thing. They may get great in the relationship, but more difficult in the external world, usually in part because now the person cares more and it's harder to stay chained to their mountaintop. So let me break down what I was talking about a moment ago, how to tie sex and desire into a character arc. You can look at things like, I know this is a big page, but it's just a bunch of questions, things that you can consider. How do they respond when they're vulnerable during sex and after it? Does this vulnerability and intimacy bring them closer together afterwards? This is the consequences piece. Or do they pull apart? Do they pull back? Does one of them pull back and the other one doesn't? And if so, why? What inner beliefs or fears are operating? That's that motivation thing. That's the backstory piece. How does being vulnerable make them face or feel or think things that they haven't before, or face something they've been hiding from? And how specifically is being vulnerable and filled with desire for this person different than any time before? A lot of times this gets presented in a romance. It was never like this before, but we never really understand how. You can't just say it was never, have your character think it's never been like this before. Specifically, what? What's different with this person in what you think, feel, or do than what you've done before? And how is it tied into your emotions and your beliefs? And then, like I said a moment ago, you want to balance each forward step of the romance by increasing the external difficulties or demands or complications. Basically, the romance in some way complicates their pursuit of the external goal. And at some point, they're aware they're going to have to choose. A lot of times, mid-story, they'll think, I could do them both, but they can't. Challenges to their goal increase after sex, and they have to choose. Or the external stakes increase, and they're forced repeatedly to be choosing more romance, less romance, toward the romance, away from it. Okay, so that is a deep dive, but quick primer on desire and how to tie it to arcs. The other thing that you can do to build the promise of them is to build respect. You want to ensure that each romantic lead grows to respect something about the other person. How they approach the world, their values or strengths, maybe some hidden sides like we were talking about a moment ago, personality traits. Ideally, the respect is something they didn't acknowledge at first in the story. It develops over the course of the story as they solve problems together, experience desire and vulnerability together. Those are great ways to show that they belong together because they respect each other. All right. Those are 4 great ways that you can build the promise of the romance. And affinity, solving problems, desire and sex, and vulnerability having consequences in the external world and in their arc, and you build respect between them. All right, the next key, oh, I almost forgot, and I'm glad I put this slide in because I did want to talk a little bit again about calibrating the hope and the fear, because this is your main task. You're constantly raising questions in the reader. Will the romance succeed? And you're constantly changing what the reader thinks the answer is. Yes, they'll make it. No, they never will. You can think about it as you're leading your character on this sort of journey where they're constantly thinking different things. Yes, these guys are never going to make it. They're so different. Oh wait, maybe they will. Oh yeah, no, not now that this thing has happened. Oh wait. Yeah, I think they will. They really will. Look at them. They're going to be great. It's going to be hard, but they can. Oh, no. This will never work. Yay, it worked. I mean, that's the journey, constantly doing that in the story. Every scene is building one or the other, leading them closer to the romance or further away. And it's the same as in other genres. Again, think about in the non-romance genre, the bad guy and the hero. You're constantly thinking they're going to beat this guy. Oh no, they're not. Yeah, they are. They just came up with a great plan, and they have a team, and they can do that. No, they're doomed. Same thing, but for the romance. All right, third key. We only have 4, so we're halfway done. We're actually a little more than halfway. Is forced proximity, and I'm talking about this because while it might seem obvious, it doesn't happen in a lot of romances. Or especially when you're just starting out writing romance. The romantic leads need to be together on the page a lot. They need to be together and doing things. They don't need to be happy about it, but they need to be together. And so use the plot as your center of gravity, pulling them together. Like I said at the beginning, if they don't want to be together, the plot is what pulls them together. And it's really powerful. I don't want to go into too many details, but basically you're tying the romantic leads together with a very short rope. You don't want to have your leads going off and doing things and then coming back to the romance partner, the other lead, and sort of talking things out, or the other person is their comfort zone, or arguing, but then they go out and do the story again without the other character. You want them together. You want to tie them together with a really short rope. So how do you do this? The general question you can always be asking yourself is, how can I force the leads together in this scene? And it's just very, very generic. ask, how can you do it? Specifically, you can add more external art obstacles or story requirements that are going to force them together against their will. These are just sort of things in the world that force them together. Weather is a great one. You know, snow, winds, those kinds of things, forcing unwilling people together. Very powerful. Car problems. Like I said, their roles in the story can keep them apart, but they can also force them together. Lawyers on opposing sides may have to spend a lot of time together. A boss and an employee have to spend time together. Give the world, find ways in the world to force them together. Also find story problems that can only be solved by involving the other lead. Now this is in ways sort of the flip side or in addition to the one we just talked about, but the difference here is that they're reluctantly, possibly, probably, but they're choosing to be with the other person because the other person has something they need, some knowledge, some skills, some access to something that they need to achieve their story goal or their scene level goal. So they're making a choice to be with the other person because the other person is the only one who has what they need at that moment. And this is tied directly to the next strategy for forcing proximity, and that is to assign all plot important roles, tasks, knowledge, information to the other romantic lead. You want to remove and reduce the role or importance of secondary characters. Don't have your romantic leads have to go to someone else to get the key to the building that they need to sneak into. Have the other romantic lead have the key, and now they got to deal with that person when they don't want to. Very powerful. So you want to be adding external conflicts that force them together against their will. You want to add conflicts and problems that require them to involve the other lead in order to achieve their goal. And you want to reduce or remove the importance of secondary characters and give all those skills and knowledge to the other romantic leads so they're forced to be with them. All right, we're on to the last key, and it is sacrifice, and it is really important. Sacrifice is sort of the end point of that personal protagonist arc, the character's arc, and it is the best way to show a character has arc, to show that they've changed, they've transformed in some fundamental way. And in a romance, this is always in service of the romance or the benefit of the other romantic lead. It's super powerful. It not only shows that they've changed, but it is what will get them together. Doing this thing is what will get them together with the other lead. And in a lot of romances, both leads are making a sacrifice. Sometimes only one does it. You know, it really depends on the story and your characters. So how do you build up sacrifice? You want to layer on additional stakes later in the story. You're adding reasons that they have to succeed, or you're making it more dangerous for them to fail. And this is what makes it hard for them to choose the romance over their story goal, especially if they thought they were sure what they were going to do a scene or two ago. This is why it's great to add stakes and complications later on, because after about 50 to 75% of your story, you're often going to have the characters really wanting to choose each other. They're getting along, they're developing respect, they're solving problems, their desire is there. You have all the reasons in the world for them to choose the romance. You need something that still holds them back from it and that can reverse something that they thought they were sure about a scene or two ago, like, I really like this person, I want to be with them. Boom, here are more problems or stakes that chain you to your mountaintop. Give them a reason to re-up their commitment to their story goal. And this is how you add those plot twists and turns, those value changes, the hope and the fear. Those are inherently dramatic and really grab the reader because they're constantly thinking, oh no, what are they going to do now? And it then makes the choice that they make at the end, the romance, the pro-romance choice, way more satisfying. So you can consider adding both internal and external kind of motivations. Same thing as before. External motivations, stakes are life realities or others who will be affected. Maybe more people will be affected. If the CEO doesn't get this land with it, the big cupcake bakery is on, maybe the company's going to fold and they're going to have to lay off all their employees. I mean, that's some stakes that would make it harder to give up a goal. There's also the internal stakes, though. And the way you do this is tied to what we were talking about before, because as the relationship deepens and the external complications mount, it taps into their vulnerabilities. And they don't want to deal with those. They don't want to face those. They don't want to feel that feeling. And that makes it harder for them to choose the romance and puts it more in doubt for the reader, if they will, which makes their sacrifice even better at the end. Another way to build in sacrifice is to set one or both leads on the precipice of losing something that matters to them unless the other one acts. So basically you're giving them the power to save the other person or to deliver the other person's goal, but only if they give up their own. Give them something to do. Give them some power over the other person's life. I often think about the O. Henry short story, you know, the Gift to the Magi, where they each have this thing that they prize above all else, but they give it up to get the other person what they think they prize above all else. And in the end, you know, what we see is they prize each other. They prize the love above all else. And that is just a little microcosm of what we're talking about here. And I also want to mention that paradoxically, perhaps, this could be letting someone go, depending on how your story has gone and what's been important in it. Someone could choose to let someone go here as their sacrifice. And a very cool thing to do is to give your characters lines in the sand, I call them, some kind of personal code or motto that encapsulates a belief or a commitment, something about themselves or the world. And you want to establish it early in the story and then echo it a couple times. Then make them cross it to save or win or protect the other person or to prove their love. I was watching a movie the other night with the kids. It was the Dark Tower. We won't talk about the movie itself, but there was a point in the movie where the gunslinger and the kid, Jake, are talking, and the kid, Jake, he's talking about how they can fight together against the villain and to protect the tower. And if we could just get there, he says, and the gunslinger says, there is no we. All that matters to me is destroying the bad guy, Walter. That's his line in the sand. And they are really powerful if you build them into, and it doesn't have to be some big declaration on someone's part. It can come just via a conversation where they state what their line in the sand is, and then you make them cross it at the end. Really powerful and beautiful technique. Okay, so how do you build sacrifice and give them a good sacrifice? You increase motivation or stakes as the story goes on. You set the leads on the precipice of losing something unless the other one acts. And you establish a line in the sand and then make them cross it. These are great sacrificial strategies. And those are our 4 keys. You're building the chasm between them, the promise of them. You're forcing them together. And you're requiring sacrifice, which is what proves they've transformed and proves that they are worthy of love. I hope you liked this. I hope that it added a lot and gave you a bunch of ideas for your story that you're working on and maybe made you consider writing a romance. You can always contact me at any time. contact@romancewritinglab.com. And I hope that your stories are wonderful and inspiring for you and your readers. Thank you so much for having me here. Bye-bye.